Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Cathedral. It's just about 7 o'clock, or just gone 7 o'clock, so we'll start. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for being willing to go through our security checks, which are designed to keep us all safe and clean, we hope, this evening. And thank you especially to our candidates for being willing to stand for election and for submitting themselves to our scrutiny here tonight. To get us underway, may I introduce Tessa Tucker for the Conservative Party, Andrew Bell for the Green Party, Steve Race for the Labour Party, and Will Axel for the Liberal Democrats. We tried to make contact with Reform UK, but have received no response. Let me tell you about the format for this evening. The audience, well, all sorts of people have submitted questions in advance for which we're grateful. Unsurprisingly, we've received rather more questions than we're likely to have time for. So I've tried to pick the more popular themes, and we'll take them one at a time and ask each candidate to respond in turn. And you'll be pleased to know I'm going to vary the order in which we put them to the candidates so that Tessa, for instance, doesn't have to go first every time. Apologies in advance to those of you who've taken the trouble to send in questions that we won't get round to. But I think there are 50 questions, and that's too many for tonight. We're grateful to the Exeter University Student Guild who supported this evening, and they're recording this event, so you can watch it again and again on their YouTube channel if you feel so inspired. Please, audience, let's listen courteously to what's being said, to which end might I ask you to ensure that your mobile telephones are turned to silent. And my plan is that we're going to finish by 8:15 or thereabouts at the latest. So, candidates, please be concise and to the point. And to get us going, we're asking each candidate to sell themselves to us in a couple of minutes. So, Tessa, over to you.
Well, it's phenomenal to be here in this fantastic building. Last time I was here a few weeks ago, I was abseiling down the North Tower to raise money for the cathedral, so I'm hoping I'm going to be on slightly firmer ground tonight. I'm not going to pretend it hasn't been a hugely difficult period over the last few years, but I think in order to judge that time fairly, we need to consider the huge events that have occurred, not just for people here in Exeter and the UK, but all over the world. We've had a global economic crisis, the pandemic, and soaring energy bills caused by the war in Ukraine. And the government rightly stood by people, delivering the £407 billion furlough scheme, helping people with the cost of their energy bills, and also making cost of living payments, which were made to 11,500 people here in Exeter alone. And that all came at a cost, and we've had to pay down those bills. But the Chancellor has set a course for the economy that I believe is the right one. We're starting to turn a corner. Inflation is at now 2%, which is better than the Eurozone and the US. We've got the fastest growth in the G7, and we're out of recession. Meanwhile, we're still just a week or so away from polling day, and we still have no idea what Labour will do if they form the next government. But I'm here to talk about Exeter, and whether I'm knocking on someone's door, having a chat with my family and friends, speaking to the doctors and nurses at the RD&E who've cared so amazingly for my children over the years, or mums at the dance school where I take my daughter to ballet, they all want Exeter to be the best place to live, work and raise a family. And so that's why I'm standing here today as the candidate, because if you put your faith in me and vote for me on the 4th of July, that's what I'm committed to deliver.
Thank you. Andrew.
Thank you. Well, lovely to see so many people turn out this evening. So we hear a lot about conspiracy theories these days. Well, here's a real one. The conspiracy of silence that has pervaded this election campaign. For example, the Institute for Fiscal Studies has accused Labour of a conspiracy of silence over how they will fund improvements to the NHS, social care and other public services. And there's been silence on the biggest security threat facing this planet, and that is the climate crisis. And no mention of the years of cruel austerity. This silence is driven by the fact that the other parties don't want to be honest about the scale of investment needed to tackle the crises we face. Neither do they want to look at the elephant in the room, taxes, and the need to ask those with the broadest shoulders, especially the super rich, to pay a little more. And the introduction of a carbon tax on the biggest polluters, which will raise billions and help us transition to a green economy. So what will fairer, greener taxes do? It will fix our NHS and social care, so everyone gets the support they need when they need it. It will give a fair pay rise to nurses, junior doctors and other health and care workers. It will provide the affordable council and social homes that hundreds of thousands of people are waiting for. It will insulate millions of homes so they stay warm over winter and cut household energy bills. It will empower a renewable energy revolution so we can produce the cheapest forms of electricity. Take public control of public transport so we can create more reliable, frequent and affordable trains and buses. And create safe streets for active travel so every child can safely walk or cycle independently. Make our water industry clean up its act and work for people and the environment rather than leaking profit to shareholders. So fairer, greener taxes can raise the billions needed for a large-scale investment programme to fix our crumbling public services and pay for the green transition, with all the benefits that will bring.
Thank you. I'm just realising how hard it is to get through things in 2 minutes. I think it's a discipline we clergy at the cathedral ought to learn to do, really. Steve, you're next.
Thank you very much. My name is Steve Race. I'm the Labour Party candidate at this general election. Now, I'm in politics really for two reasons originally. So the first is that I grew up as a gay person. So when I was growing up, we had Section 28. I couldn't get married or have a civil partnership. There wasn't an equal age of consent. That changed with the Labour government last time. So that is a real example of how politics matters to individuals. I found that found out very, very quickly as a young man growing up when I was 14, when that last Labour government came into power. The second reason I'm in politics is my sister. So she was born when I was 10, she was born with a genetic condition that was a very severe disability. She lived just 2 days shy of her 10th birthday. Her life was full of operations and many different trips to the hospital. And we couldn't have survived without the NHS. And I saw that the NHS did so much work with her, and over the course again of that Labour government, the NHS got better, and she got better care. She got more therapies across the course of her life that made her life a better quality of life. And so I think for those two things, I know that politics really has an impact on people, and as I said, I'd learned that very, very quickly. But over the last 14 years, we really have seen our country go backwards, I think. So everything from the cost of living, which has a massive impact on people's lives now, to homelessness that we see all around us that has massively increased since 2010. Even when I'm talking to people on doors, I've spoken with my Labour team to about 7,000 people since the general election started, and we're always out on the doorstep. You know, dentistry comes up most often about the lack of NHS dentistry in this city and across Devon. Exeter has huge potential. It's a really successful city, but we're being held back. This is a change election. We have a lot to change, but there is positive hope and we can do it. And I'm looking forward to the questions where we can expand on that. So thank you.
Thank you. Finally, Will.
Hi. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, so my name's Will Axel. I'm the Liberal Democrat parliamentary candidate for Exeter. I was brought up in Exeter, I live in St James, and I've worked for several years in Exeter's independent food sector. So I'm invested in and care about outcomes for our city. I've already got a record of action to show for it. In February, I attended a special educational needs protest at County Hall, listening to families hit by Devon Sen scandal, finding a way forward. 2 years ago, following door knocking in Pennsylvania, I contacted the police to sort a specific long-term pavement parking issue. Earlier this year, I wrote to Devon County Council to finally sort the underground subway flooding issues in Alphington and St Thomas. I'm petitioning South West Water to publish all their sewage discharges in near real time, like Thames Water do, so we can know what's actually happening in our rivers. And last Monday, I wrote to Stagecoach in Devon County Council with many suggestions on how to improve Exeter's unreliable bus service, informed by door knocking and over 60 survey responses. I'd also vote to put Exeter before party politics in Parliament. I will work collaboratively to push the likely incoming Labour government to be more liberal, progressive and transformative, whether it's voting to end the sewage scandal, signing the Climate and Nature Bill, publicly urging Ben Bradshaw to back a ceasefire in Palestine, for which he shamefully abstained, whether it's putting the right investment, incentives in and public control of our NHS, an ambitious plan for free personal care like we introduced in Scotland to help fix our social care crisis, or action on the cost of living, like our fully costed plan for free primary school lunches, ending the cruel two-child benefit cap and fairer taxes. Vote for your representative to be someone who cares, fights for Exeter and already has a record of action to prove it.
Sorry to interrupt everybody, but there is a candidate who's been excluded from East Hustings. His name is Willie Poulter. He's the Community Assembly candidate. Unfortunately, he's not able to be here. He's not allowed to come and talk.
Please go away.
But I just wondered, would you guys like to hear from him? Because he is outside. Would you like him to come in?
Well, therefore, what about the other independent candidate?
Community assemblies are
I think we've seen that actually we're happy as we are, thank you very much. So we'll carry on without.
What about the candidates?
I think it's our invitation as a cathedral, and it was our right to choose those that we thought would have most chance of securing a significant number of votes at the poll, and we therefore decided to invite these parties.
It's quite undemocratic to not allow
Thank you.
Security, can you remove this one?
Right, so we have a big question that we want to face this evening.
Go.
We have a big question as the first one, which I think is all-encompassing. It will be tempting for our candidates to talk for the next 20 minutes on it. Please be as concise as you can, but Andrew to start with. The health service, the justice system, the education system, and prisons are all in crisis. Given the economic situation and the international situation, what is your order of priorities and why?
Okay, thank you for the question. So I think there are the priorities really revolve around tackling the cost of living crisis, and that is really a cost of inequality crisis. So in terms of priorities, I think tackling the climate emergency can actually help both of those things. So while we're tackling the climate emergency, we can also be tackling cost of living crisis, for example. So if we insulate homes, we bring down energy bills, people stay warmer, healthier, and they pay less bills while we tackle the climate emergency. If we invest in renewables, we will have cheaper energy because we know that solar and wind are the two cheapest forms of energy. So again, that will help address the cost of living crisis. Another priority for me would definitely be the health service and investment in the health service. And the Green Party is the only party that's being really honest about the levels of investment that the health service need. So we're talking about an average of £40 billion a year over the next 5 years, which is a huge sum of money. But we know that the health service has been starved of funds for years. It's crumbling along with many of our other public services. And so that must be a priority to restore our health service. And we would bring social care in line with health care so that we treat them both together. And if we manage to sort out social care, we will relieve the pressure on the health service. So that 40 billion is investment in health and social care. So that's definitely a priority. And we can find the money for this. It's not impossible. It's simply about redistributing funds and taxing differently in a fairer and greener way. And we can find the money by taxing particularly the very wealthy to make this transition to better public services and tackling the climate emergency. If we tax the millionaires, people over 10 million in assets and wealth, just 1% of their wealth, and anybody over 10 billion, 2%, 1 billion, over 1 billion, 2%, then we could raise significant billions of funds to help with the health service and our other public services and make that transition to a greener economy.
Thank you. Steve, health service, justice, education, prisons, what are your priorities?
There's a big agenda, it's fair to say. There's a lot that needs fixing. But first and foremost, everything relies on a sustainably growing economy. A lot feeds off that, but there's a lot that we can fix if we do invest in the economy, and that's what a Labour government would do, partly through the Green Prosperity Plan, which will be a seed funder to work alongside business to make sure that we get the jobs, investment, manufacturing into this country that we need, especially around decarbonisation of our electricity system. So the Labour Party will oversee and invest in a quadrupling of offshore wind, a trebling of onshore solar, and a doubling of onshore wind as well, which has been effectively banned under this government. That will also help with the cost of living crisis, which does impact on people's lives on a daily basis. It can bring bills down. It will bring bills down because it will be energy that's decoupled from the sort of oil and gas and the disrupted regions where the oil and gas comes from. We also know that disillusionment of politics' ability to deliver is enormous at the moment. We've had many broken promises over the last 10 years in particular, and I think when I talk to people on the doorstep, they just think that these issues are so big that nobody can fix them. And I think we have a big job of bringing hope back to people, but also bringing confidence back that government can do something. So we can deliver 700,000 extra dentist appointments per year. If you don't know this, 40,000 children under the age of 9 end up in A&E over the course of the last 2 years simply because of their teeth. It's the number one reason why children under the age of 6 are in A&E and are in hospital, their teeth, because they don't have dentists. We can sort out the dentist contract to make sure that people have NHS dentists. In terms of the health service generally, if we don't get people off the waiting list, there are thousands and thousands of people in Exeter and around Exeter who are on the waiting list who would be able to work if they weren't on the NHS waiting list and could be able to rejoin the economy, get on with their jobs that they want to do. But they can't because they're living in pain because they're on a waiting list which stretches to 7.5 million people at the moment. It's one of the biggest waiting lists we've ever had in the NHS. And so sorting out diagnostics, so doubling the number of scanners that we have in the NHS is what the Labour Party wants to do so that we can catch the conditions before people have to get hospitalised. We want to put 40,000 extra appointments into the NHS every week in order to get those waiting lists down. And we do want to sort out social care as well, so that people can leave hospital more quickly and more safely and get back to where they are best to recuperate, which is their own homes, surrounded by their family, friends, and social network as well. I just want to make a point about mental health as well, because we have a pandemic of mental health in this country at the moment, and it doesn't have the parity of esteem that it deserves with physical health. So I'm a primary school governor at Willowbrook Primary School over in near Beacon Heath, and I know that on a daily basis, those kids could do with a bit of support. They could do with a bit of therapy to help them with some of the issues that have gone through COVID in particular. So investing in mental health support in every single school and every single community is a pledge that Labour Party has made. It's the first steps, because we really think that people will see the impact. People in Exeter will see the impact over the course of the first year or two of the Labour government. And we really hope that by starting small on these first steps, we can rebuild that trust, that we can tackle the big issues as well, which as a government you will be doing. So government thinks long term, but you also need to think short term and have a tangible positive impact on people's lives. And that's really what we want to achieve if we form a government after July.
Will, what are your priorities?
Yes, it's really where to begin, really, because you hear a lot of times on the doorstep that it just seems nothing works, whether it's a health service, crumbling schools, polluted rivers, the list goes on, and Steve and Andrew have touched on quite a few already as well. So, Liberal Democrat plan is guided by listening to people, speaking, reaching out on the doorsteps, as I've been doing. And right at the forefront, what we've put at the core of our manifesto as a result of this is a plan to fix our NHS and social care system. We've got an ambitious plan for free personal care that we introduced in Scotland, like I mentioned, and that would really transform our social care crisis. It would mean people can actually get care that they need and don't have to pay through the nose for it. We'd also raise the carers' minimum wage by £2 an hour. That equates to over £1,000 a year, because we've got a huge carers shortage. And yeah, the NHS waiting list is over 7 million, and the 12-hour A&E waits have increased by, I think, 1,000 times on the past decade, which is an insane stat, but is a true one because they were very small in 2015. So health is right front and centre in our manifesto, including mental health as well. We put a dedicated qualified mental health professional in every school, mental health hubs for young people, and mental health checkups throughout people's lives. The environment is also a big priority for me, whether that's, tackling the sewage scandal. Lib Dems have the toughest action plan needed to actually properly hold water companies to account and reform them, root and branch reform of water companies. We need to radically shift investment from fossil fuels to renewables, and we'd also do a 10-year emergency insulation programme. And also public transport is unreliable, to say the least. And I'd also like to respond to your point about disillusionment as well, Steve, because it is a big problem. We agreed on that. I think Starmer hasn't helped with breaking so many of his pledges that he made to become leader. I think he made 10 pledges and he's broken just about every single one of them. And I'd also like to ask you a very specific question, because I think we need to transform our politics for good. I really believe that. And Lib Dems would do that in 3 ways. We have a community politics approach, which actually, through community forums, neighbourhood planning, citizens' assemblies, as the gentleman outside is a big advocate for. We would take the big money out of politics by capping political donations at 10k a year. And thirdly, most importantly, I'd say we are the largest party continually campaigning for electoral reform. So Lib Dems are the best place to make it happen. This will make votes reflect seats, make politicians more representative and accountable. But it can only happen if we vote for it. And I know Ben Bradshaw Can I ask this?
No, you can't ask questions of other candidates.
Oh, okay.
And I'm going to come back. You're answering some other questions from later on. So I think we'll cut you off there if we might.
Would you support electoral reform is the
And
question.
go off to Tessa. What are your priorities given the crisis that we're in so many areas?
Thank you. Yeah. So, like I said at the beginning, I'm not going to pretend that the last few years haven't been difficult, and clearly there's a lot more work to do in all the areas that you've highlighted there. I would just say we've been putting record levels of investment into the NHS. In fact, it's up by 38% in real terms since 2010. And there's more money going into these services than perhaps ever before. But I think what the Chancellor rightly focused on in the budget, and that I agree with, is that we need to look, whether it's prisons, healthcare or education, we need to look at productivity and workforce planning and make sure that the money that we're putting in is delivering the best value possible for taxpayers. And that's why we've got a workforce plan that will put 6 million more people back into the workforce, and expanding childcare so that people can access 30 hours from when their children are 9 months. And important to me as a working mum to see every opportunity for women to re-enter the workforce after they've had children. So there's more work to do, but I think in general we need to focus a lot more on productivity and workforce planning and building back our workforce after the pandemic, which was severely impacted by that, in order to deal with a lot of the issues that we're tackling at the moment.
Thank you. One of the areas that you touched on, we had a number of moving questions really about education and the crisis facing education. Let me just pick out a couple of sentences from them. Massive funding cuts, class sizes too big, huge lack of teaching assistants, broken system, broken buildings, no money for textbooks, appalling recruitment, punitive accountability system through Ofsted. Each child gets only one chance at an education. What will your government do to rebuild our education system? Steve.
Great, thank you. Absolutely, education is the bedrock of our society. In reality, we need everyone to have an absolutely fantastic education, and 93% of our young people go to state schools. I went to my local state school when I grew up. At the beginning, under the last Tory government before '97, we were sharing sort of textbooks. I remember sharing my Route Nationale, my French textbook, between me and 2 other people, and that changed when the Labour government was last in. In Exeter, it's one of the great success stories of the Labour government. If you remember, if you look back, the schools used to be pretty poor in Exeter before the Labour government came in, rebuilt them all, and helped them to federate and invested in them too. So we have a state school system we can be very, very proud of, but it is under pressure. As we've already discussed, and so we do need to invest in our state schools, and so the Labour Party is proposing as a first step again 6,500 extra teachers for our schools, to make sure that those class sizes start to come down. There's extra support for teachers in the classrooms, and to make sure that they're able to teach, which is what they really want to do. Now, my experience again as a school governor has been that we have these islands left, and we have had lots of things stripped away around these islands. So everything is falling on schools, everything is falling on hospitals, and we really need to start rebuilding around those as well, to make sure that the social networks around these institutions are built up so that we're able to give people the best start in life. So those 6,500 teachers, we've said very clearly that will be funded through removing the VAT tax break on private school places. That won't affect anyone who's in a private school with an EHCP certificate. So we also do have to deal with the SEND crisis, as Will referenced, across Devon, which is a real problem for parents. One of the most sort of moving times in Exeter, when I'm talking to people on the doorstep, is always when parents are talking about the struggle they have had to get their child the support they need in school. They haven't been able to get the HCP, they haven't been able to get the support. And often they take those children out of school completely and homeschool them, or otherwise they take decisions that they wouldn't otherwise have taken. So we need to support our schools to make sure that children with SEND sort of needs are able to be educated in their schools as well, to make sure that the support is there for children in schools, and that's what we'll do.
Thank you. Will.
So, Exeter schools receive over £300 less funding than the national average per pupil every year. That's quite shocking. That's quite bad. In Devon, it's £230 less per pupil every year for funding. And Liberal Democrats fight for fair funding. We'll fight to increase per pupil funding every year above inflation. We'll make sure that the pupil premium that we introduced in government is properly goes to where it's most needed, and because the attainment levels for different income levels is years apart at just very early ages. There's issues of national government and there's issues of Devon County Council as well. Both of which are Conservative run. So from national government, there is this underfunding, and it's felt worst in social care, providing adult social care and for children as well. And there's a lot of government narratives as well, such as with the safety valve, which essentially is a long-term plan to reduce how much local authorities spend on SEND, and that means that they have an approach of rejecting as many education, care, health plans that they can as possible. So actually, so many parents take them to tribunal, and that's costly in terms of money and time, which parents shouldn't have to afford. And Devon County Council also loses over 90% of those, so it's a waste of time, full stop. So there's that fault-lining approach, but there's also things that Devon County Council could do, such as taking staffing in-house, that would reduce costs and improve efficiencies. But most importantly probably is to just listen to families, to respect them and take on board what they say, what their feedback, their experiences, and what their suggestions are for improvement.
Thank you. Tessa.
Yeah, I know it's been a tough time for teachers over the last few years, dealing with all sorts of challenges. My sister's a teacher in a secondary school just up the road, so I know only too well what some of the issues she's had to contend with. Look, our commitments are around maintaining and raising and continuing to raise standards, in schools. We've already committed an extra £2 billion of funding this year and next year, and are looking at lots of other measures to support teachers, like banning mobile phones and tackling absenteeism, as well as funding 100,000 new apprenticeships, which are, having worked in the engineering sector for a very long time, I know what an important gateway they are for many people into the workplace. So yes, I mean, we've got a record on education that I think we can stand firmly behind. We've raised the number of good and outstanding schools across the country from 68% to 90%. Our readers are some of the best in the world. But I just finish off by just speaking to what Steve was saying around independent schools. It's not a tax break, it's a tax rise, one of which I'm sure we'll see many more of if Labour become the next government. And as well, he talks about children struggling to get support. Well, I'm concerned that the children leaving that sector will struggle to get a place in their local school. And I'd finish just by adding that it's a policy that's unravelling before us. They've already pushed it back a year. It's not going to fund these extra teachers. In fact, in real terms, it works out at about a third of a teacher per school. And for me, it simply leaves the question, what else are Labour going to tax into oblivion simply because they just don't agree with it?
Thank you. Andrew, schools.
Okay, schools, yes. An issue very close to my heart as an ex-primary school teacher and somebody who worked in education for many years. After I was a primary school teacher, I worked in global citizenship and sustainability education in Exeter. I was based at the Global Centre, did a lot of work for them. So it's an issue very close to my heart. Education is yet another victim of austerity over the years, and so as a starting point, the Green Party would invest 8 billion into schools, including 2 billion to tackle the RAC concrete crisis, and we'd also put 2 billion into a pay uplift for teachers, which is much needed. When it comes to the curriculum, it's a bit like, our education system is a bit like a production line, rather than something that values children's unique skills and qualities. So we'd like to see a much more holistic curriculum, so arts and vocational subjects on a par with the sort of more traditional subjects. It was Caroline Lucas, actually, who pushed for the natural history GCSE, evidence that one Green MP can push well above their weight and deliver. So that was a great achievement to get that through. We would abolish Ofsted. We don't think that it's a good way of assessing schools. It's a very unfair way of assessing schools. We think that we ought to trust teachers, schools and local authorities to do what Ofsted are doing in a very bad way, I think. Free school meals, we'd allow free school meals for all schools, both primary and secondary. And when it comes to private schools, we would impose VAT on fees. We would go a step further than that, though, and we would remove the charitable status from independent schools. They're not charities, they're businesses. So we would remove... we would remove charitable status. When it comes to higher education, we would restore or seek to restore maintenance grants, and we would scrap tuition fees. Terrible that so many students have been lumbered with massive debts through their lives. We need to scrap that, scrap tuition fees. So I think that's it.
Thank you very much. You can tell I didn't write this next question. As a young person and a first-time voter, I'm incredibly scared for my future in the face of the climate crisis. How will you prioritise climate justice if elected? And will you use your position to back a Green New Deal? Is it you?
I think so.
Will.
Helps that I'm a young person as well. So that's a really good question, because in fact the reason I became engaged, involved, passionate about politics in the first place was because I believe we need to tackle climate change. I think it's the biggest issue of global heating, as you might want to call it. I believe it's the biggest issue of our time because it's so large scale and it's accelerating. So this is an issue I obviously hold very close to my heart. The Lib Dems have got a fantastic action plan to tackle the sewage scandal, and that has effects on the because it's a climate and nature crisis. Which brings me swiftly on to the Climate and Nature Bill, which I and Andrew have signed, and other candidates have not. This sets out a clear pathway, clear ambition, clear framework on how to address the crisis, recognising that emissions are cumulative and the more action we take now, the greater dividends that a global society. So we'd also, as I've touched on before, invest so much more in renewable energy and have a 10-year emergency plan for insulation, taking away money from investment and subsidies for fossil fuels and tax breaks for fossil fuels, which have actually outstripped subsidies and tax breaks for renewable energy by £20 billion between, I think it was 2015 and 2022. That's insane in a climate emergency that kind of policy is happening from government. And we'd also make it so that we can ramp up the electrification of railways because we're well behind the time in Exeter and as the UK as a whole compared to our European neighbours. And I've also been very vocal and active on improving our bus services, whether it's their reliability, frequency or hours of operation. And I've called for specific things in that as well, really quick wins that would help improve bus services, which would mean that we can actually come to rely on them and become more sustainable as a society. For example, having live bus times at stops and stations, that's something that other areas enjoy and would be very easy for Devon County Council and Stagecoach to collaborate on to produce. So I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Tessa, the environment.
Yeah.
Climate.
Yeah, so I completely agree. Dealing with the challenge of a changing climate is one of the central issues that's going to face any government now and into the future. But I do think it's important to say that we're the first economy to halve emissions. We've got huge plans to expand nuclear and deliver more clean energy. And I work in the EV sector. I've worked for companies that have developed technology that will help us respond to some of the issues associated with climate change. And I'm really interested in how we can support enterprises throughout the country in helping them come up with new, innovative ways to tackle the issue. But we need to get there in a pragmatic way and in a way that doesn't hold back our economy or make it difficult for families who are struggling to pay their bills. So we need to respond to it, but that needs to be done pragmatically. And we also need to recognise the huge progress that we've made already.
Thank you. Andrew.
Well, I'm really glad to see this question because, as I said earlier, it seems to be a bit of a missing subject in the election, in many election debate. This is a real crisis we face, and we have to acknowledge that this is really serious. We ought to be on a war footing, really, in dealing with this crisis. Every day in the last year, the sea temperature has broken heat record every single day in the last year. That's how serious it is. And we're seeing record temperatures on a daily basis around the world in various countries, various parts of the world. So we know that this is a crisis that's only going to get worse unless we take really dramatic action, and only the Green Party is really putting forward the policies for the bold approach that we need to tackle the climate emergency. And don't just have to listen to us saying that. Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace this week released a ranking of the different parties' environmental policies, not only environmental actually, but on transport and justice and democracy, a whole range of policies. They scored 39 out of 40 for the Green Party. They scored 20.5, just half that, for Labour. And the Tories, I think, scored 5 out of 40. So what would we do? So here's some policies that we would do. We would want to see 70% of energy from wind power by 2030. And we think that's achievable if you scrap the ban on onshore wind. I mean, Devon is quite a windy place with lots of hills. I personally don't have an objection to seeing wind turbines on the hills, and I think we've got to be realistic that is what we have to do if we're going to have a renewable energy revolution and achieve cheap renewable power. We'd invest 10 billion in transport. Transport is responsible for a quarter of our emissions, so we need to invest heavily in public transport. The privatisation of the railways and the deregulation of buses was another mess that the Tories left us in. We're suffering the consequences on a daily basis. If you ever tried to get a train in our region, you'll know what I mean. And Stagecoach, they are fleecing our city. Private profit when it should be in public hands and run for people, not profit. And of course, if we invest in making our streets safer, we will encourage active travel. And that's also a vital part of tackling the climate emergency. Not only that, but it will also be healthier, much healthier if we invest in active travel. In terms of nuclear, it's a bit of a distraction really. What we should be investing in is, rather than nuclears, we should be investing in a better grid connections and interconnectors. So really making that investment in our grid that can actually cope with storing renewable power rather than wasteful, expensive and very hard and long to deliver nuclear power stations.
Steve,
Great.
climate.
Thank you very much. It is a climate emergency. It is incredibly important that we mitigate both what's coming down the line anyway now through baked-in carbon emissions, but also that we transform our economy to make sure it's a sustainable economy coming forward. And I don't accept this argument that climate is completely absent from the debate. When you look at the Labour manifesto, it's baked into our economic growth. Decarbonisation of our economy is the platform for economic growth for the Labour Party if we're in government. So I want to make a point first though. A couple of points first. What I've been so disappointed with over the last couple of years is the breakdown of political consensus over climate change. So I want to say that the Labour Party does believe in climate change, it believes in the science, and it believes in doing something about it and making sure that we prepare ourselves for that. And I think that we need to make sure that we do that in a socially just way as well. So we cannot have a situation where those who are green are the ones that can afford an air source heat pump and an electric car, and those who cannot afford those things are left behind and are left on sort of gas boilers and things like that. So we have to make sure that A, we communicate the climate crisis in the right way and make it relevant to people who are struggling, many of whom are struggling to put food on the table for their children. So if I understand that for us, we can talk about the climate crisis as the big challenge. If you cannot put food on the table for your children in the next couple of days, that is your biggest challenge. So we have to do both of these things at the same time, don't we? We have to make sure the economy works for everyone as well. So the way that we do that is to get green economic growth throughout the economy, and that's what I was talking about in terms of green prosperity earlier on. That's about borrowing to invest in move forward with a new fleet of nuclear power stations because that provides the baseload capacity in advance of battery power, which will be coming down the line. And I think the big point I want to make is there are two options for us as a society. We can either shrink our economy, you can degrowth, and that will bring with it huge challenges around who gets poorer if we have fewer jobs, if we have fewer businesses, who loses out, what public services will we not fund. The alternative is this plan, which is to grow our economy sustainably, to make sure that people do have jobs and well-paid jobs in the future, and that comes out of decarbonising our economy. Now, I'm really proud that the last Labour government was the first government in the world to commit legally binding targets to meet the climate challenge. I also want to talk about the biodiversity crisis, because that is really important, and it's slightly different to the climate crisis. We completely understand this, and if you look at our DEFRA Secretary, Steve Reed, he's put a massive program about how do we tackle biodiversity crisis in this country. So this is about Clean Air Act to bring in. This is about tackling the sewage crisis, including criminal charges for execs who continually waterways. But it's also about working in partnership with farmers who are the custodians of much of our wilder, or certainly rural areas, to make sure that they are wilder and that they are paid to make sure that they encourage biodiversity as well. We want to invest in more and wilder national parks. We also want to invest in peatbogs, which might not be particularly a romantic idea, but they are massive carbon stores, which we really need to protect. We're also, I don't drive, so I cycle everywhere or I use public transport. We are going to be renationalising the train system, bringing it all under one roof. We'll have GB Rail. And we have an extraordinarily good programme for buses as well, for the bus system. Now, nationally we talk about the railways a lot. We don't talk about buses, which is actually the way that most people get around, and it's the way that we can get most people out of their cars if they're able to get out of their cars and onto public transport. We all rightly agree that the bus system in Exeter has been woeful. It's getting slightly better, but still woeful, I think. When I see last year I talked about a nice sort of older lady who was sat at a bus stop in Chantry Meadow Way and waiting for the bus to get to her hospital appointment. She'd been waiting over an hour. She had no idea whether it would ever turn up, but she needed to get to that hospital appointment, so she was just waiting around for whether the bus would ever turn up. So sometimes a bit like waiting for Godot, I think, with the bus system. Now, we're going to, you might have seen Andy Burnham as to give those powers to all the transport authorities to make sure that if you want, you can run community bus routes owned and run by local authorities. Now, that is currently illegal for most local authorities. We're going to take that ban away, and we're going to re-regulate them, allow local transport authorities to re-regulate the bus system. Now, Devon County Council, as part of the devolution deal that they've got, has been given the opportunity to use those powers. My understanding is that they're not planning to use those powers to sort out our bus system. One of the first jobs I will be doing if I'm elected is getting onto Devon about the buses and getting onto Devon about the replacement for co-cars and co-bikes, which collapsed over a year ago, and they have not replaced it. There are many things that we can do to make our city better, and just my final point is going to be that we also have a depth and breadth of expertise in this city with the university, with the Met Office, and with a whole host of businesses around there. I want to make sure that I'm banging the drum for Exeter to make it not just a good place to invest in new climate businesses, startups and scale-ups, but it's the place you need to be if you want to start up a climate tech business in the country. It has to be here. We need to bring the quality and the quantity of private sector funding to help these businesses grow as well. But I think as an MP, that's a job I could really do in partnership with the business community and with others in the city too. Thank you.
A number of people submitted questions on this next subject. Save the Children reported this week that 20,000 children in Gaza are lost under rubble or missing, on top of the 15,000 confirmed child deaths. In the 1980s, even Margaret Thatcher suspended arms sales to Israel when it invaded Lebanon. Do you support the stopping of arms sales to Israel now? Tessa.
So I think the first thing to say is what's happening in Gaza at the moment is terrible, and as a mother it breaks my heart to see the devastating pictures that we're seeing on the news. We're supporting partners on the ground to deliver aid as we speak, and we're pushing hard to get the fighting to stop with an immediate pause so that we can get aid in and hostages out. And that means then we can work towards a sustainable ceasefire. And what the British government has said for a long time on this issue, which is about creating a credible pathway to then a two-state solution.
Andrew.
In short, the short answer is yes. The Green Party was the first party to call for immediate bilateral ceasefire. We called for that very soon after the 7th October attacks. It took Labour a rather long time to get there, I must say. They did finally get there, but it took them a very long time. So, yes, absolutely, we would suspend all arms export licences to Israel until the violence stops. We would go further, though. So some of the things that the Green Party has called for is a cessation of all military collaboration with Israel, including the use of British bases by Israeli forces and intelligence sharing. We'd also look at targeted boycott, divestment and sanctions against individuals and institutions who are supporting or facilitating Israel's occupation of Palestine. And we believe that the UK government should be using its position as a permanent member of the UN Security Council to vote for rather than abstain on ceasefire votes. I mean, what's happening in Gaza is utterly shameful. And we know who's responsible for that. It's the Netanyahu regime. So there ought to be also targeted sanctions against key individuals in the Israeli leadership, including travel bans and asset freezes on Israel's government ministers. And of course, what we want to see is an end to occupation of the Palestinian territories. And the UK government, and I hope the Labour government, because that's what we're going to get, it will return to international law, international law being the benchmark for UK policy, and repair the UK's international reputation as a defender of the international order, because this government, by their actions and their support of Israel, has been complicit in the murderous invasion that's been going on by the Israelis in Gaza. And that's not to say, of course, that we don't equally condemn the Hamas attacks. They were appalling. It was a terrorist attack of utter brutality, and that also ought to be condemned. But what we've seen from Israel is completely disproportionate. It's collective punishment, and it's completely unacceptable, and we ought to take the strongest possible terms that we can against the Israeli regime.
I think as a human being, it's appalling to see what's happening in Gaza for a start. I just want to say, first and foremost, Ben Bradshaw has been one of the biggest advocates for the Palestinian cause over the course of his 27 years of work as Labour's MP for Exeter, including as a member of Labour Friends of Middle East and Palestine. There were some tricksy sort of motions in Parliament that I don't think we need to go into. On the main motion that mattered, Ben Bradshaw absolutely voted for a ceasefire, and the Labour Party is in favour of an immediate ceasefire. In terms of UNRWA funding, we're calling for an immediate reinstatement of UNRWA funding to help ensure that aid gets in Gaza. We are completely supportive of the ICC and the ICJ processes around accusations of genocide, and that's the right, there's the right forums to go to. We are signed up to those for a specific reason. We are in favour of travel bans and sanctions on settlers in the West Bank who are causing incredible suffering there as well. And finally, just in terms of this point, the Labour Party has moved its position to make sure that we are supportive of statehood for Palestine as part of a process to a two-state solution instead of as an outcome of a two-state solution, which is really important. So that will be part of the Labour Party's position as well. Now, in terms of the arms sales, my understanding is that what goes from the UK is extraordinarily limited, but what we don't have is the legal advice that was provided to the government, because they won't release it, so they won't tell us what the legal officers of the government believe. So we do want to see that, and if we are in government after July the 4th, that is one of the things that we will be looking at and releasing immediately.
Will?
So similar to Andrew, yes. is the answer. Should we end arms sales with Israel? Yes. And yeah, it's disappointing that the Conservatives haven't published the legal advice that they've received on this. But I think we've seen enough today that what's going on in Gaza is absolutely horrific, and the worst conduct of justice is an absolute international failure and disgrace. And the fact that the UK government has really dragged its feet on this and stayed to like is scandalous. So yeah, Lib Dem policies to suspend arms sales with Israel, and we've been calling for an immediate ceasefire for at least 6 months. As part of this, Palestinian statehood immediately we'd recognise, because this is the route to long-term peace, the rights of Palestinians being able to enjoy the land that they have done for generations, free from war and persecution and horrors. Yes, so Ben Birchall did abstain in the November vote, which is the one that I wrote it in, publicly, and there was a lot of I'm sure he had a lot of responses from people in Exeter. I wasn't alone in writing to him in that. We really need people who are going to be leaders as our MP, as our government, both for Exeter, both here and on an international scale, leading other countries like the United States to do the right thing, to end arms sales with Israel, and put people first, humanitarianism first.
Thank you. There is widespread cynicism about politics in this country. Hardly surprising, because we've had enough of politicians who are transparently self-serving and self-promoting. If elected, in what ways will you personally and your party be different? Andrew.
Okay, thank you. Yes, well, we have had a really bad time in politics, haven't we? We've had scandal after scandal, and it really has reduced the trust in politics. And I think it's rather fitting that the Conservatives' time in office is reduced to the gambling. For 14 years they've gambled with our country. They gambled with austerity, leaving millions of people poorer and with crumbling services. They gambled on Brexit, which economists say will leave us much poorer. They gambled with people's lives during the pandemic, delaying action and leaving NHS staff without adequate PPE. Then Liz Truss gambled with the economy, tanking it in the process, leaving thousands of people with higher mortgages. So we've all lost trust with the Tories, from the Tories, gambling. And so it's rather fitting that Rishi Sunak's gamble for a summer election is going to end in their defeat. So it is hardly surprising that trust in politics is low after all that, and 14 years of Tory government has not left us with a lot of trust in politics. I think that what we need is a more consensual type of politics, with parties working together more, but we're not going to get that, of course, until we get a proportional representation. And there's only one other country in Europe that has first past the post. Do you know where that is? Belarus, which I think says a lot, really. And I would really like to hear Labour committing to a proportional representation system to be introduced in the next Parliament. No more dithering and delay. And if we had PR, of course, we'd have to have a much more consensual type of politics, people working together from different parties to arrive at solutions. And when you have that type of working, you generally come up with better solutions to problems because you're hearing a range of views. So that's one thing. We'd also want to scrap the House of Lords and introduce a second elected chamber, and our two peers are fighting to scrap the house in which they sit. So yeah, I mean, those are a few things, but I think that the crux of it is really we need to change our electoral system, and that is, you know, we're heading for a massive majority Labour government, and that's, I don't think, is healthy for our democracy.
Steve, how do you rebuild trust in politicians?
Great, thank you. I think that it is about competence and it's about delivery. Competence first, the ability to deliver, the ability to deliver without wasting taxpayers' money, and to have a tangible impact on people's lives. And as I said at the beginning, I think that at the moment people don't think that anything can change because things have just been getting worse for quite a long time now. We have had a pandemic, we have had Brexit, which has been a sort of slow puncture on our economy for a long time now. What we need is a stable government where we don't have 4 chancellors, 3 prime ministers in the space of 6 months. Let's have the reference to the lettuce outlasting the Prime Minister. We need that stability back into the system so that people can actually, they know who is delivering and they know that they are delivering for people. And that's why the Labour manifesto, when you dig into it, there's a lot there because the government can do a lot. But in terms of those first steps, we don't want to over-promise and under-deliver. What we want to do is promise what we can deliver so that people can see the tangible change to their life. They can have an NHS dentist, they can get a few more teachers in their schools within the first year and a half or so of the Labour Party government. And then if you build that trust, you can deliver bigger change for people as they see it coming along. So it is about competence, it is about delivery, and that is really why I'm really proud to be standing with Keir Starmer as the leader of the Labour Party. I think he will be a really, really good Prime Minister. I think he will make decisions on behalf of on behalf of people and because he thinks it's the right thing to do. I want to just touch on electoral reform because people keep asking me. And so, you know, personally, I'm supportive of electoral reform. I personally support the Jenkins proposals I will continue to fight for that. I'm a member of Labour's electoral reform kind of society. It is not in our manifesto because we have been talking about all of the things that are so important to people. And I get that electoral reform might unlock some of those things in the future, but we absolutely have to deliver for people. If what we do is form a Labour government and then we start talking about how we elect ourselves in the country, that is not going to build trust. That is not going to deliver for people in the immediate term. So I will keep fighting for electoral reform, and I know a lot of my Labour Party colleagues will be doing so too. But I will do that within the Labour Party, and I will make my case. But I think, you know, the priorities for us are to make people's lives better in this country, and that will be what a Labour Party wants to do and will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Well,
So I agree with what Andrew said. He's really hit the nail on the head there. I think electoral reform will transform our politics for good. It will make a huge difference. It will make people's voices heard, and they'll be able to see that because first past the post, it creates 2-horse races. It's so outdated, and it means you have to vote for you know, the lesser of 2 worse options. And that's no way a democracy should run. So yeah, I'd be really interested to hear as well. I know you said no questions to our fellow candidates, but
I'm going to stick with that.
if Steve, if Steve might like to say at another point in time whether he'd break a 3-line whip in order to vote for a form of proportional representation. I'd be very interested to hear that.
Thank you. Right, Tessa, rebuilding trust.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we do need to find a way to re-engage people with our political system, and I think that's going to be a big challenge for whoever forms the next government, because I'm concerned about the rise of more extreme politics in this country. I sit firmly in the centre ground, and I'm concerned about the rise in parties on both the far left, which I'm afraid I have to say that the Green Party has opened its doors to many on the far left and are no longer just the party of air quality and hedgehogs. But I'm also concerned about the rise of Reform, who sadly aren't here tonight to represent them. I believe their candidate lives in Plymouth. But look, we need to make sure that we re-engage people back with politics firmly into the centre ground. And I don't want to see the rise of any more dog-whistling politics from the likes of Reform, which I'm very concerned about how that might impact the future of this country.
In a moment, we're going to give you a minute to sum up each. Apologies again for not asking more questions. I hope we've given you enough for you to be able to find out what matters to each of our candidates. There is one last question I want just a simple answer to, but I thought it was an interesting question when it came in. Would you like to reveal who your biggest political heroes are? Steve, who's your biggest political hero?
There were a few, but I would say Ernie Bevan, I think. A good Devon lad originally, who not only Churchill said that he couldn't have won World War II without Ernie Bevan at his back, sorting out workers' kitchens in factories to make sure he totally understood that the war effort relied on people's stomachs, but then went into government, died holding his ministerial key because, as one of the early Labour people, he was dedicated to the job and to making the country a better place for working people. Set up NATO, but also total internationalist as well, and wanted to make sure that Britain remained engaged in the world in a positive way. And so I think he's one of my political heroes.
Thank you. Will, do you have a political hero?
I wouldn't say in particular I had any one, but one I'd pick out is Daisy Cooper, who's the deputy leader of the Liberal Democrats, because she is so passionate about what she does. She really puts people first, her constituency first, and she does it in a way that is very positive and collaborative, and I think there's something we can learn from.
Thank you. Tessa?
I'm going to maybe surprise people by saying that my political hero is actually Nancy Pelosi. I think she's a remarkable politician. She's an amazing legislator. And like me, she had her family before she started her journey in politics. I just think she's showed huge amount of resilience. She's been through so much with what happened with the insurrection, and then latterly what happened with her husband. But she's a real survivor, and I can only hope that I get to have a career as long as hers in politics.
Thank you. Andrew?
Okay, well, it would be no surprise to you that it would be Caroline Lucas, who has been the only Green MP since 2010. She has been quite remarkable as a single MP for the Green Party for so long, and she's acknowledged that she's absolutely worn out from having been the only Green MP in Parliament, but she's been remarkable in the way that she has pushed issues up the agenda that were laughed at and scorned at when she first talked about them, but now they're kind of accepted as mainstream, particularly the whole idea of the climate emergency and biodiversity crisis. And she will be sadly missed, I think, from people of all sides of the House, actually. I think she's greatly respected. But she has paved the way for more Green MPs, so watch this space. There'll be more Green MPs coming in her place.
1 minute to give us something to remember you by as we go home this evening. Will, starting with you, and I'm going to be fierce about the minute.
Oh no. So something that I didn't get to talk about, which I would have liked to, is essentially our fairer taxes plan, which would see around £600 more through taxes and benefits for the poorest households, whereas Labour's plan would be about £0, slightly worse off people, and the Conservatives would be a lot worse off. So, closing statement, I don't want to be Vote for a local champion with fresh energy, perspective and ideas, who puts Exeter's people and our environment before private profits and dogmatic party politics. If, like me, you deeply care about investment, right incentives for and public control of our NHS, a plan to restore our environment, including ending the disgusting sewage scandal, and electoral reform to transform our politics for good, then vote for a fair deal. Vote Will Axel for Exeter.
Thank you. Tessa.
Well, I said it at the beginning, I've put myself forward to be the candidate to be Exeter's next MP because I really care about the future of this city. I want to see it thrive, and I want to see it grow, and I want to see it become the best place to live, work and raise a family.
Thank you. Andrew.
Okay, so the Tories are toast, we know that. We all expect a Labour government on July the 5th, most likely with a large majority, but we need a group of Green MPs to help make a Labour government bolder. And in Exeter, the only contender to Labour is the Greens. Greens are on the up in Exeter. In recent local elections, we came strong second, and there are now 7 hard-working Green councillors. Wouldn't it be great if we could have a Green representative in Parliament who will stand up for the city, stand up for action on the climate and environment, stand up to help those who've been ground down by years of cruel austerity policies. And the more Green MPs and votes the Green Party gets, the greater the influence we will have over a Labour government, even without proportional representation. On 4th of July, I'm standing for real hope and real change, for a fairer, greener future for our city and country. Vote Green.
They've all kept to their minute. Can you do it, Steve?
We'll see. First off, thank you all for coming this evening. It's been a brilliant evening, and as all of these hustings that we're doing are, and the questions are as ever fantastic. I think this is obviously an election where people are looking for change, and Exeter has succeeded fantastically over the last few years, and particularly with the Labour MP to advocate for it. That is a big challenge when there isn't a Labour government, but it's a brilliant combination when there is a Labour government. The things that we can achieve together across the city with a Labour MP who cares about the city, who really goes out to advocate for the city, is what Exeter needs. With a Labour government will be a recipe for success, but it will be a recipe for success for the people who need it most, people who rely on public services, who rely on schools and institutes who need electricity. These are things, whilst we can tackle some of the big challenges in the country as well, we can make a real difference to people's lives with a Labour government and a Labour MP here. So thank you all very much for this evening. It's great to see you, and let's have a chat afterwards.
Thank you to all 4 of you. As I said at the beginning, thank you for being willing to stand. I think given the crisis in our country, I'm not envious of anyone that's going to be in the next Parliament, really. So we're really grateful that some of you want to go up there and make a difference. Whoever gets elected, we wish you well, and we look forward to you representing Exeter and our interests to the best of your ability alongside the needs of the world. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your questions. Apologies if we didn't ask yours, but we're very grateful to all of you for taking part.